Hello, Brovs. We're back with Black No More by George S. Schuyler. I started reading this book and I read the whole first chapter, but somehow, when I paused it at one point, I didn't actually pause it, and so then it goes off into a tangent where I'm just walking around and doing stuff, and the camera's going everywhere. And then, when I came back, thought I unpaused it, but I actually paused it. So I chopped out 4 or 5 minutes, and I don't know what happened. So I'm just going to read it over again. It's a long chapter. Let's go. Max Disher stood outside the Honky Tonk Club, puffing a panatella and watching the crowds of white and black folk entering the cabaret. Max was tall, dapper, and smooth, coffee brown. His negroid features had a slightly satanic cast, and there was an insolent nonchalance about his carriage. He wore his hat rakishly and faultless, evening clothes underneath his raccoon coat. He was young, he wasn't broke, but he was damnably blue. It was New Year's Eve, 1933, but there was no spirit of gaiety and gladness in his heart. How could he share the hilarity of the crowd when he had no girl? He and Minnie, his high Yalla flapper, had quarreled that day, and everything was over between them. Women are mighty funny, he mused to himself, especially Yalla women. You could give them the moon, and they wouldn't appreciate it. That was probably the trouble. He'd given Minnie too much. It didn't pay to spend too much on them. As soon as he'd bought her a new outfit and paid the rent on a 3-room apartment, she'd grown uppity. Stuck on her color, that's what was the matter with her. He took the cigar out of his mouth and spat disgustedly. A short, plump, cherubic blackfellow, resplendent in a narrow-brimmed brown fedora, camel's hair coat, and spats, strolled up and clapped him on the shoulder. "Hello, Max," greeted the newcomer, extending a hand in a fawn-colored glove. "What's on your mind?" "Everything, Bunny," answered the debonair Max. "That damn Yalla gal of mine got all upstage and quit." "Say not so," exclaimed the short black fellow. "Why, I thought you and her were all 40. Were is right, kid, and after spending my dough, too. It sure makes me hot. Here I go, and buy 2 covers at the honky tonk for tonight, thinking surely she'd come, and she starts a row and quits." "Shucks," exploded Bunny. "I wouldn't let that worry me none. I'd take another skirt. I wouldn't let no dame queer my New Year's." "So would I, wise guy, but all the dames I know are dated up. So here I am all dressed up and no place to go." "You got 2 reservations, ain't you?" "Well, let's you and me go in," Bunny suggested. "We may be able to break in on some party." Max visibly brightened. "That's a good idea," he said. "You can never tell. We might run in on something good." Swinging their canes, the two joined the throng at the entrance of the Honky Tonk Club and descended to its smoky depths. They wended their way through the maze of tables in the wake of a dancing waiter and sat down close to the dance floor. After ordering ginger ale and plenty of ice, they reared back and looked over the crowd. Max Disher and Bunny Brown had been pals ever since the war when they soldiered together in the old 15th Regiment in France. Max was one of the Afro-American Fire Insurance Company's crack agents. Bunny was a teller in the Douglas Bank, and both bore the reputation of gay blades in Black Harlem. The two had in common a weakness rather prevalent among Afro-American bucks. They preferred yellow women. Both swore there were three things essential to the happiness of a colored gentleman: yellow money, yellow women, and yellow taxis. They had little difficulty in getting the first and none at all in getting the third. But the yellow women they found flighty and fickle. It was so hard to hold them. They were so sought after that one almost required $1 million to keep them out of the clutches of one's rivals. "No more yalla gals for me," Max announced with finality, sipping his drink. "I'll grab a black gal first." "Say not so," exclaimed Bunny, strengthening his drink from his huge silver flask. "You ain't thinking o' dealing in coal, are you?" "Well," argued his partner, "it might change my luck. You can trust a black girl. She'll stick to you." "How do you know? You ain't never had one. Every gal I ever seen you with looked like an Ophé." And I did find out that Ofe is a disparaging term for a white woman, and I assume it refers to black women that look like white women. So I'm not positive. But that's what I ascertained when I looked it up. Hump, grunted Max. My next one may be an Ofe too. They're less trouble and don't ask you to give them the moon. I'm right with you, partner, Bunny agreed, but I gotta have one with class. None of these Woolworth dames for me. Get you in a peck of trouble. Fact is, big boy, ain't none of these women no good. They all get old on the job. They drank in silence and eyed the motley crowd among them. There were blacks, browns, yellows, and whites, chatting, flirting, drinking, rubbing shoulders in the democracy of nightlife. A fog of tobacco smoke wreathed their heads, and the din from the industrious jazz band made all but the loudest shrieks inaudible. In and out among the tables danced the waiters, trays balanced aloft, while the patrons, arrayed in colored paper cups, beat time with the orchestra, threw streamers or grew maudlin on each other's shoulders. "Looky here, Lottie Laud," exclaimed Bunny, pointing to the doorway. A party of white people had entered. They were all in evening dress, and in their midst was a tall, slim, Titian-haired girl who had seemingly stepped from heaven or the front cover of a magazine. My, said Max, sitting up alertly. The party consisted of 2 men and 4 women. They were escorted to a table next to the one occupied by the 2 colored dandies. Max and Bunny eyed them covertly. The tall girl was certainly a dream. "Now that's my speed," whispered Bunny. "Be yourself," said Max. "You couldn't touch her with a 40-foot pole." "Oh, I don't know, big boy," Bunny beamed self-confidently. You never can tell. "Well, I can tell," remarked Disher, "'cause she's a cracker." "How you know that?" "Man, I can tell a cracker a block away. I wasn't born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia for nothing. Just listen to her voice." Bunny listened. "I believe she is," he agreed. They kept eyeing the party to the exclusion of everything else. Max was especially fascinated. The girl was the prettiest creature he'd ever seen, and he felt irresistibly drawn to her. Unconsciously, he adjusted his necktie and passed his well-manicured hand over his rigidly straightened hair. Suddenly, one of the white men rose and came over to their table. They watched him suspiciously. Was he going to start something? Had he noticed that they were staring at the girl? They both stiffened at his approach. "Say," he greeted them, leaning over the table, "do you boys know where we can get some decent liquor around here? We've run out of stuff, and the waiter says he can't get any for us." "You can get some pretty good stuff right down the street," Max informed him, somewhat relieved. "They won't sell none to him," said Bunny. "They might think he was a prohibition officer." "Could one of you fellows get me some?" asked the man. "Sure," said Max heartily. What luck. Here was the very chance he'd been waiting for. These people might invite them over to their table. The man handed him a $10 bill, and Max went out barehanded to get the liquor. In 10 minutes he was back. He handed the man the quart and the change. The man gave back the change and thanked him. There was no invitation to join the party. Max returned to his table and eyed the group wistfully. "Did he invite you in?" asked Bunny. "I'm back here, ain't I?" answered Max somewhat resentfully. The floor show came on, a black-faced comedian, a corpulent shouter of mammy songs with a gin-roughened voice, 3 chocolate soft-shoe dancers, and an octet of wriggling, practically nude mulatto chorines. Or is it chorines? Then midnight and pandemonium as the new year swept in. When the din had subsided, the lights went low and the orchestra moaned the weary blues. The floor filled with couples. The 2 men and 2 of the women at the next table rose to dance. The beautiful girl and another were left behind. "I'm going over and ask her to dance," Max suddenly announced to the surprised Bunny. "Say not so," exclaimed that worthy. I don't know what that means, exclaimed that worthy. "You're fixing to get in the Dutch, big boy." "Well, I'm going to take a chance anyhow," Max persisted, rising. This fair beauty had hypnotized him. He felt that he would give anything for just one dance with her. Once around the floor with her slim waist in his arm would be like an eternity in heaven. Yes, one could afford to risk repulse for that. "Don't do it, Max," pleaded Bunny. "Them fellows are liable to start something." But Max was not to be restrained. There was no holding him back when he wanted to do a thing. especially where a comely damsel was concerned. He sauntered over to the table in his most chikish manner and stood looking down at the shimmering strawberry blonde. She was indeed ravishing, and her exotic perfume titillated his nostrils despite the clouds of cigarette smoke. Would you care to dance? He asked after a moment's hesitation. She looked up at him haughtily with cool green eyes, somewhat astonished at his insolence, and yet perhaps secretly intrigued, but her reply lacked nothing in definiteness. No, she said icily, I never dance with Then turning to her friend, she remarked, Can you beat the nerve of these darkies? She made a little disdainful grimace with her mouth, shrugged daintily, and dismissed the unpleasant incident. Crushed and angry, Max returned to his place without a word. Bunny laughed aloud in high glee. You said she was a cracker, he gurgled, and now I guess you know it. Oh, go to hell, Max grumbled. Just then, Billy Fletcher, the head waiter, passed by. Max stopped him. Ever see the dame in here before, he asked. Been in here most every night since before Christmas, Billy replied. Do you know who she is? Well, I heard she was some rich broad from Atlanta up here for the holidays. Why? Oh, nothing. I was just wondering. From Atlanta, his hometown. No wonder she had turned him down. Up here trying to get a thrill in the black belt, but a thrill from observation instead of contact. Gee, but white folks were funny. They didn't want black folks' game, and yet they were always frequenting Negro resorts. At 3 o'clock, Max and Bunny paid their check and ascended to the street. Bunny wanted to go to the breakfast dance at the Dahomey Casino, but Max was in no mood for it. I'm going home, he announced laconically, hailing a taxi. Good night. As the cab whirled up 7th Avenue, he settled back and thought of the girl from Atlanta. He couldn't get her out of his mind and didn't want to. At his rooming house, he paid the driver, unlocked the door, ascended to his room, and undressed mechanically. His mind was a kaleidoscope. Atlanta, sea-green eyes, slender figure, Titian hair, frigid manner. I never danced with Then he fell asleep about 5 o'clock and promptly dreamed of her. Dreamed of dancing with her, dining with her, motoring with her, sitting beside her on a golden... Pardon? Well, I choked to death. Sitting beside her on a golden throne while millions of manacled white slaves prostrated themselves before him. Then there was a nightmare of grim, gray men with shotguns, baying hounds, a heap of gasoline-soaked and a screeching, fanatical mob. And yes, I am censoring words that will probably get me banished or fired from my job or whatever. So he awoke covered with perspiration. His telephone was ringing, and the late morning sunshine was streaming into his room. He leaped from bed and lifted the receiver. Say, shouted Bunny, did you see this morning's Times? Hell no, growled Max. I just woke up. Why, what's in it? Well, do you remember Dr. Junius Crookman, that colored fellow that went to Germany to study about 3 years ago? He's just come back, and the Times claims he's announced a sure way to turn darkies white. Thought you might be interested after the way you fell for that Ofe broad last night. They say Crookman's going to open a sanitarium in Harlem right away. There's your chance, big boy, and it's your only chance, Bunny chuckled. Oh, ring off, growled Max. That's a lot of hooey. But he was impressed and a little excited. Suppose there was something to it. He dressed hurriedly after a cold shower and went out to the newsstand. He bought a Times and scanned its columns. Yes, there it was. Negro announces remarkable discovery, can change black to white in 3 days. Max went into Jimmy Johnson's restaurant and greedily read the account while awaiting his breakfast. Yes, it must be true. To think of old Crookman being able to do that. Only a few years ago, he'd been just a hungry medical student around Harlem. Max put down the paper and stared vacantly out of the window. Gee, Crookman would be a millionaire in no time. He'd even be a multimillionaire. It looked as though science was to succeed where the Civil War had failed. But how could it be possible? He looked at his hands and felt at the back of his head where the straightening lotion had failed to conquer some of the knots. He toyed with his ham and eggs as he envisioned the possibilities of the discovery. Then a sudden resolution seized him. He looked at the newspaper account again. Yes, Crookman was staying at the Phyllis Wheatley Hotel. Why not go and see what there was to this? Why not be the first Negro to try it out? Sure, it was taking a chance, but think of getting white in 3 days. No more Jim Crow, no more insults. As a white man, he could go anywhere, be anything he wanted to be, do most anything he wanted to do, be a free man at last, and probably be able to meet the girl from Atlanta. What a vision. He rose hurriedly, paid for his breakfast, rushed out of the door, almost ran into an aged white man carrying a sign advertising a Negro fraternity dance, and almost ran to the Phyllis Wheatley Hotel. He tore up the steps two at a time and into the sitting room. It was crowded with white reporters from the daily newspapers and black reporters from the Negro weeklies. In their midst, he recognized Dr. Junius Crookman, tall, wiry, ebony black, with a studious and polished manner. Flanking him on either side was Henry Hank Johnson, the numbers banker, and Charlie Chuck Foster, the realtor, looking very grave, important, and possessive in the midst of the hullabaloo. Yes, Dr. Crookman was telling the reporters while they eagerly took down his statements. During my first year at college, I noticed a black girl on the street one day who had several irregular white patches on her face and hands. That intrigued me. I began to study up on skin diseases and found out that the girl was evidently suffering from a nervous disease known as vitiligo. I'm pronouncing it wrong, but it's fine. It is a very rare disease. Both Negroes and Caucasians occasionally have it, but it is naturally more conspicuous on blacks than whites. It absolutely removes skin pigment, and sometimes it turns a Negro completely white, but only after a period of 30 or 40 years. It occurred to me that if one could discover some means of artificially inducing and stimulating this nervous disease at will, one might possibly solve the American race problem. My sociology teacher had once said that there were but three ways for the Negro to solve his problem. In America, he gestured with his long, slender fingers to either get out, get white, or get along. Since he wouldn't and couldn't get out and was getting along only differently, it seemed to me that the only thing for him was to get white. For a moment his teeth gleamed beneath his smartly waxed mustache. Then he sobered and went on. I began to give a great deal of study to the problem during my spare time. Unfortunately, there was very little information on the subject in this country. I decided to go to Germany, but I didn't have the money. Just when I despaired of getting the funds to carry out my experiments and studies abroad, Mr. Johnson and Mr. Foster, he indicated the two men with a graceful wave of his hand, came to my rescue. I naturally attribute a great deal of my success to them. But how is it done? Asked the reporter. Well, smiled Crookman, I naturally cannot divulge the secret any more than to say that it is accomplished by electrical nutrition and glandular control. Certain gland secretions are greatly stimulated, while others are considerably diminished. It is a powerful and dangerous treatment, but harmless when properly done. How about the hair and features? Asked the Negro reporter. They are also changed in the process, answered the biologist. In 3 days, the Negro becomes, to all appearances, a Caucasian. But is the transformation transferred to the offspring? Persisted the Negro newspaperman. As yet, replied Cashman, I have discovered no way to accomplish anything so revolutionary. But I am able to transform a black infant to a white one in 24 hours. Have you tried it on any Negroes yet? Queried a skeptical white journalist. Why, of course I have, said the doctor, slightly nettled. I would not have made my announcement if I had not done so. Come here, Sandal, he called, turning to a pale white youth standing on the outskirts of the crowd, who was the most Nordic-looking person in the room. This man is a Senegalese, a former aviator in the French army. He is living proof that what I claim is true. Dr. Crookman then displayed a photograph of a very black man, somewhat resembling Sandal, but with bushy Negro hair. Flat nose and full lips. This, he announced proudly, is Sandal, as he looked before taking my treatment. What I have done to him, I can do to any Negro. He is in good physical and mental condition, as you all can see. The assemblage was properly awed. After taking a few more notes and a number of photographs of Dr. Crookman, his associates, and of Sandal, the newspapermen retired. Only the dapper Max Disher remained. "Hello, Doc," he said, coming forward and extending his hand. "Don't you remember me? I'm Max Disher." "Why, certainly I remember you, Max," replied the biologist, rising cordially. "Been a long time since we've seen each other, but you're looking as sharp as ever. How's things?" The two men shook hands. "Oh, pretty good, say, Doc. Oh, pretty good. Say, Doc, how's chances to get you to try that thing on me? You must be looking for volunteers." "Yes, I am, but not just yet. I've got to get my equipment set up first. I think now I'll be ready for business in a couple of weeks." Henry Johnson, the beefy, sleek-jawed mulatto numbers banker, chuckled and nudged Dr. Crookman. "Old Max ain't losing no time, Doc. When that gets white, I bet he'll make up for lost time with these Ophé girls." Charlie Foster, small, slender, grave, amber-colored, and laconic, finally spoke up. "Seems all right, Junius, but there'll be hell to pay when you whiten up a lot of these darkies and them mulatto babies start appearing here and there. What you gonna do then?" "Oh, quit singing the blues, Chuck," boomed Johnson. "Don't cross bridges till you come to 'em. Doc'll fix that, okay? Besides, we'll have mo money in Henry Ford by that time. There'll be no difficulties whatever," assured Crookman rather impatiently. "Let's hope not." Next day, the newspapers carried a long account of the interview with Dr. Junius Crookman, interspersed with photographs of him, his backers, and one of the Senegalese who had been turned white. It was the talk of the town and was soon the talk of the country. Long editorials were written about the discovery. Learned societies besieged the Negro biologist with offers of lecture engagements. Magazines begged him for articles, but he turned down all offers and refused to explain his treatment. This attitude was decried as unbecoming a scientist. It was insinuated and even openly stated that nothing more could be expected from a Negro. But Crookman ignored the clamor of the public, and with the financial help of his associates, planned the great and lucrative experiment of turning Negroes into Caucasians. The impatient Max Disher saw him as often as possible and kept track of developments. He yearned to be the first treated and didn't want to be caught napping. Two objects were uppermost in his mind: to get white and to Atlanta. The statuesque and haughty blonde was ever in his thoughts. He was head over heels in love with her, and realized there was no hope for him to ever win her as long as he was brown. Each day he would walk past the tall building that was to be the Crookman Sanitarium, watching the workmen and delivery trucks, wondering how much longer he would have to wait before entering upon the great adventure. At last, the sanitarium was ready for business. Huge advertisements appeared in the local Negro weeklies. Black Harlem was on its toes. Curious throngs of Negroes and whites stood in front of the austere six-story building, gazing up at its windows. Inside, Crookman, Johnson, and Foster stood nervously about while hustling attendants got everything in readiness. Outside, they could hear the murmur of the crowd. "That means money, Chuck," boomed Johnson, rubbing his beefsteak hands together. "Yeah," replied the realtor, "but there's one more thing I want to get straight. How about that darky dialect? You can't change that." "It isn't necessary, my dear Foster," explained the physician patiently. "There is no such thing as Negro dialect, except in literature and drama. It is a well-known fact among informed persons that a Negro from a given section speaks the same dialect as his white neighbors. In the South, you can't tell over the telephone whether you are talking to a white man or a Negro. The same is true in New York when a Northern Negro speaks into the receiver. I have noticed the same thing in the hills of West Virginia and Tennessee. The educated Haitian speaks the purest French, and the Jamaican Negro sounds exactly like an Englishman. There are no racial or color dialects, only sectional dialects." "Guess you're right," agreed Foster grudgingly. "I know I'm right. Moreover, even if my treatment did not change the so-called Negro lips, even that would prove to be no obstacle." "How come, Doc?" asked Johnson. "Well, there are plenty of Caucasians who have lips quite as thick and noses quite as broad as any of us. As a matter of fact, there has been considerable exaggeration about the contrast between Caucasian and Negro features. The cartoonists and minstrel men have been responsible for it very largely. Some Negroes, like the Somalis, Fulanis, Egyptian, Hausis, and Abyssinians have very thin lips and nostrils. So also have the Malagazes of Madagascar. Only in certain small sections of Africa do the Negroes possess extremely pendulous lips and very broad nostrils. On the other hand, many so-called Caucasians, particularly the Latins, Jews and South Irish, and frequently the most Nordic of people like the Swedes, show almost negroid lips and noses. Black up some white folks, and they could deceive a resident of Benin. Then, when you consider that less than 20% of our Negroes are without Caucasian ancestry, and that close to 30% have American Indian ancestry, it is readily seen that there cannot be the wide difference in Caucasian and Afro American facial characteristics that most people imagine. Doc, you show no yo onions, said Johnson admiringly. Don't pay no attention to that old Doubtin' Thomas. He'd holler starvation in a pie shop. There was a commotion outside, and the angry voice was heard above the hum of low conversation. Then Max Disher burst in the door with a guard hanging onto his coat tail. Let loose of me, boy, he quarreled. I got an engagement here. Doc, tell this man something, will you? Crookman nodded to the guard to release the insurance man. Well, I see you're right on time, Max. I told you I'd be Johnny on the spot, didn't I? Said Disher, inspecting his clothes to see if they had been wrinkled. Well, if you're all ready, go into the receiving room there. Sign the register and get into one of those bathrobes. You're first on the list. The three partners looked at each other and grinned as Max disappeared into a small room at the end of the corridor. Dr. Crookman went into his office to don his white trousers, shoes, and smock. Johnson and Foster entered the business office to supervise the clerical staff, while white-coated figures darted back and forth through the corridors. Outside, the murmuring of the vast throng grew more audible. Johnson showed all of his many gold teeth in a wide grin as he glanced out the window and saw the queue of Negroes already extending around the corner. Man, he chuckled to Foster. At $50 a throw, this thing's gonna have the numba business beat all hollow. Hope so, said Foster gravely. Max Disher, arrayed only in a hospital bathrobe and a pair of slippers, was escorted to the elevator by two white-coated attendants. They got off on the 6th floor and walked to the end of the corridor. Max was trembling with excitement and anxiety. Suppose something should go wrong. Suppose Doc should make a mistake, he thought. Of the Elks excursion every summer to Bear Mountain, the high yellow Minnie and her colorful apartment, the pleasant evenings at the Dahomey Casino doing the latest dances with the brown belles of Harlem, the prancing choruses at the Lafayette Theater, the hours he had whiled away at Boogie's and the Honky Tonk Club. And he hesitated. Then he envisioned his future as a white man, probably as the husband of the tall blonde from Atlanta. And with firm resolve, he entered the door of the mysterious chamber. He quailed as he saw the formidable apparatus of sparkling nickel. It resembled a cross between a dentist's chair and an electric chair. Wires and straps, bars and levers protruded from it, and a great nickel headpiece, like the helmet of a knight, hung over it. The room had only a skylight, and no sound entered it from the outside. Around the walls were cases of instruments and shelves of bottles filled with strangely colored fluids. He gasped with fright and would have made for the door, but the two husky attendants held him firmly, stripped off his robe, and bound him in the chair. There was no retreat. It was either the beginning or the end. And that's the end of chapter 1 of Black No More. Schuyler, if you haven't listened to the introduction, was obviously a black writer in the Harlem Renaissance. I don't really know much about him, but he apparently became quite conservative and by the 1960s had renounced the civil rights movement and other things. So that's all I know of him, really. Oh, his name becomes Fisher? Okay. All right. Strange book. As I said, written in 1931. I think obviously 1971 re-release. First Collier edition. That's all.